First of all, thanks Krishna, Shri, Tanaya, and Yash for joining on the screen, and all the participants who are joining. This is our seventh edition now of SaaS Talks. Just to give a quick background, the intent here is to have a discussion on a micro topic. And what that means is that we want to take one topic where we go into a little bit of a depth. And the intent is that, at least we hope that this discussion is going to help you with some specific things as you are building your business. And that's the reason to go sort of very specific on some of these topics. Um, it is meant to be a discussion, not a panel. At the same time, in every session, we have one anchor guest. This time, that's Krishna, and I'm going to give a quick background on Krishna shortly. But after the first 10 minutes, we are going to open it up to everyone. Anybody can ask questions. If some of you have experience in SaaS go-to-market and have experience on the pricing front, please don't be shy. Let us know, raise your hand, and actually you are welcome to join on the screen here as well. And even during the session, you are welcome to ask questions. The one request I have is, when anybody asks questions, please do limit the question to the topic, which is pricing for the day. Other kinds of questions can be covered in other sessions, but we'll focus on pricing on SaaS. Why this topic? At least I continue to find that as we work with very young companies and as you begin to take your early products to market, it is sometimes very hard for founders to figure out what should, for example, be the basis of pricing. Do I price monthly, quarterly, annually? Do I price by users? Do I price by usage? Do I price by some other metric? Am I charging too low? Am I going to leave money on the table? Or am I charging too high? I'm going to scare away customers. And many of these questions is, if you want to change things, you are changing while the sort of business is in flow. So some of these calls are not easy to make. That being said, I know that anybody who has built a business, they have made these decisions. Some hopefully have fired right. Some have unfortunately fired wrong as well. And the intent will be to sort of go deeper and understand how pricing works. But a quick introduction to Krishna. Krishna, I met for the first time, I think in 2013, when he was operating out of a home in Pune. So by the way, Krishna is the founder of Mindtickle. And I have confessed this to him many times that we all make mistakes as investors. And Mindtickle is actually one of my big mistakes as an investor over the last 8 years. And every time I have met Krishna and his co-founders, I don't think there has been an occasion where I have not learned something from them. Krishna, to be honest, was a bit hesitant coming into the session saying, look, I also have questions on pricing. And I told him this is not a panel. He can also ask questions that he has. And it's a pretty power-packed panel. Priyank has also just joined. So Krishna, with that context, I am going to welcome Priyank. So Krishna, I'm going to shoot the first few questions to you first. I think for the benefit of all the people on the call today, I think it might be useful if you can just give a 1 or 2 line introduction to Mindtickle, but thereafter, I'm keen to understand that when you started, what was the initial basis for pricing that you took? And what were the questions in your mind and what answer did you come to and why?
No, absolutely. First of all, thanks Alok and thanks team, and honored to be on this panel, and thanks to all the audience. I hope I make, like we all make the best use of this 1 hour. I'll try to keep my answers short. Most of them are like learnings by mistake or by, hit and trial. And I think Alok, I think we have grown a lot with discussions from you, and that is why probably Mindtickle is where is. If you had invested us in, then maybe we would have ended up somewhere else, or maybe we wouldn't have tried harder.
No, look, Priyank is pretty happy that Axel has invested. I can see that.
Yes. So with that, I think at Mindtickle, what we have created is a SaaS platform. So basically, we are a sales readiness platform. Primarily, we enable companies to enable their customer-facing teams, like mostly the sales and customer support or customer success teams, so that they have all the right knowledge and training, so that when they are talking to their customers, they are able to deliver value. So primarily help them onboard much faster, help them launch with new product trainings and all those kind of things. So that is what we do. And So, but Alok, to answer your questions, actually our pricing has gone through a lot of, not even pricing, but the format has gone through a lot of change. I'll quickly tell you like how we started, and then we'll come back to like, I mean, I'm still figuring out what is the secret sauce, as I mentioned to you, right? I think it's something like, you just hit in quite a few things and then something worked. So when we initially started, as you know, we before sales readiness platform, we are a new hire onboarding platform. So actually we started with the treasure hunt platform. So initially we thought we'll do treasure hunts. So that is what we were doing when Excel invested in us, right? So we are supposed to be a treasure hunt platform and a gamification platform. So at that point in time, the thought process was we will probably give this as a service. We never even thought of software as a service. We just thought of a service. So we thought that we'll be probably, and we used to charge event wise. So we'll do like, oh, you have this big thing like sales kickoff, and the way, not sales kickoff, like, you have this. So our original model was like, you are going to spend like around 2000 rupees on a lunch for someone, right? So if you are taking like probably 100 people out, so you'll probably spend around 2 lakh rupees. So if you want to change like a team building event, so you can pay us at 2 lakh rupees and we will host this event for you and make money. So that was the first model. And again, we'll come to some nitty gritties. I don't want to hog all the limelight, but there are two magical points, especially in India: 2 lakh rupees and 10 lakh rupees. So everybody,
Okay.
2 lakh rupees. I mean, now things might have changed. So 2 lakh rupees was the magical number that we knew that everybody will pay. And if it is a larger company, then 10 lakh was the limit. You should not cross this lower bound and upper bound. So these were the things. I don't know. There was a psychological number. So that is where we played initially. And then we realized that, oh, this platform is good, and people started using it for new hire onboarding. And then we thought that we should not charge, because we have to charge per new hire. And that was again very interesting because it was per new hire. So we thought that companies are anyways spending, like they give them a t-shirt or a jacket or like, something like that. So if even if they ask them like around $50 to $60, which would be like, I don't know, 4 to 5,000 rupees or in that range, so they should be good. So the whole idea was to map to the buyer journey, like what the buyer is thinking. So if the buyer is spending 5 lakh rupees in an event, they can pay us 2 lakh rupees. If the buyer is spending 10,000 rupees per new hire, maybe they can give us 5,000. So that is where we were. And then obviously over a period of time, then it evolved. So maybe I'll answer that part later.
Yeah. So actually, then Krishna, let's go to the point where you decided to become a SaaS company.
Yeah.
Right. When you became a sales readiness platform, you actually went to market as a SaaS.
Yeah.
At that point, what became your basis for pricing? And did you look at any alternatives at that point or not?
So actually, no, that's a very good question. And I'll circle back that actually pricing was one of the reasons we became a pure SaaS company. So I'll come back to that. So our SaaS was actually kind of a discovery. Then it happened, like, because in today's world, SaaS is a common word, but Alok, if you remember, 2013, there were hardly any SaaS companies or anything called SaaS, right? So the whole idea was, so we realized that if we are going to charge these companies like this $50, it was a good business for us. But even like, we sold to SAP, right? Your company that, your prior company. But then we realized that even in an SAP, the max seat you can sell is like 500 or 1,000, right? So in 1,000 into $50 also, if you charge, right, you will probably make, I don't know, something like a $50,000, right?
Right.
So getting a SAP like a client, and you will make only $50,000 a year, right? And then also you'll also not be qualified, because if people are not hiring throughout the year, our billing will be very, flaky, and you cannot make a predictable model. So that is where we thought that we have to get to some model where we have to make monthly money, right? So that forced us that we'll have to do something where we can charge for the platform and get the people on our platform, not one time, but again and again. So that is where we moved from new hire onboarding to something called sales readiness. And that is where the transition happened. And since the transition happened, now the whole idea was that we should make money every month. So that is where actually it started. Now the idea was like, now if you are going to charge me every month, then how much should I charge, right?
Yeah.
So then there is a 2-3 parameters that you have to see. One, I already talked about, like, what is the context in which you are selling? One was the event model, right? One was the new hire model. Now you are talking to the salespeople, and in salespeople, what segment are you seeing? So especially we were selling primarily into US. So US generally, a sales rep salary is something around 150,000 base, 150,000 bonus, something like that, right? In that ranges. And he generally creates $1 million for a company on an average. So from that perspective, it back calculated like how much will you pay for that kind of a person, right?
Yeah.
So in an HR, probably you'll not pay the same amount. But if you are getting this $1 million, and if you were to invest another $500-600 on this person, it's not going to hurt you, right? So
Yeah.
that was one point of view. Like, what is the ROI that this your like product will give to these people? So you drive it from ROI, right? Second was to triangulate. What are the other softwares, and you don't want to be like way out of that league. So Salesforce is the upper limit, right? Because Salesforce generally charges $120 per user per month. So that was
Right.
our benchmark. And then on the lower limit, there were softwares which were selling somewhere between like close to $10. So we ended up somewhere between $50 to $60, and you throw the numbers and then you experiment, right? And then the third part is you have to genuinely see your cost of service. And in SaaS, we all know our margins have to be in the range of close to like 80% and all those things. So we did some calculation to figure out like what kind of deals we'll do, what will be the ACV. If
Right.
you were to do $100 million deal, company in revenue, then like what an average deal size you want. For that deal size to happen, how many users, and for that users, how much price. So I mean, there was a 4 or 5 ways of triangulation or whatever, like not triangulation, multiple ways, and that is how we figured out. And on it, I mean, like lucky or maybe yes, with this little bit of science, that number sticks, and that number has worked out well for us.
Got it. One last question I'll ask you, and I have a long list actually on pricing myself, but I want to open it up to everyone after this question. Is that when you start out as an entrepreneur, and in your case, you were doing event-based pricing, right? It was a one-time thing you did. And then you became a SaaS company.
Yeah.
Now, the norm, at least in US, is that you charge annual upfront for 12 months.
Yeah.
However, sometimes as a young company, people don't want to take a bet on you. And you are giving them comfort by saying, look, I'm only going to charge quarterly or 6 monthly or monthly, actually, for that matter. Number one, did that happen in your case or not? Did you do those kinds of pricing plans? In case you did that, did you decide at some point to discontinue those? And what would be your advice if you were sort of redoing that?
I think at least we had an advantage that our software was at least a little bit more mid-market to enterprise, right?
Right.
Because SMB, I think people are okay to experiment, trying fast, getting out, and they don't want to lock in.
Right.
Our whole value proposition and our sales cycles were longer. That if people were spending time with us, the minimum commitment even we wanted or they wanted was a year, because our CAC was much higher. So
Right.
I will not allow anybody to come in and like just sign a 3-month deal, because I mean, at least I want to recoup my investments, which is my payback period that time was much more than a 12-month. So I'll not even
Right.
allow that, right? So you have to calculate that way. And I think companies were also investing in I mean, like if you are going to run all your new sales people or sales programs on this one, you don't also want to mess it up in a 3-month period, right? So thankfully, we were lucky that we started with the proper annual plan, and the companies were also okay with it. And again, I think in US, I have seen people, I mean, things have changed now, but generally people are not, I mean, people were comfortable with that. Over a period of time, what we have done is we have changed it to like pay upfront or like sign for 3 years or something like that.
Got it.
Yes, we were lucky to, or like in a market where we started with an annual pricing and we continued with that.
Got it. So at this point, I want to open it up to everyone, and I will actually introduce the folks on the screen here, because everybody brings a very unique background today. It's actually probably the most power packed I've seen this to be. So Shri used to run a very large entity within Inmobi and now an entrepreneur. Yash is the Chief Business Officer of MoEngage. Tanaya is part of the go-to-market team at Mixpanel. And Prayank is an investor with a firm which you guys might not have heard of called Axel. And he and I happen to share a board where we often debate pricing as well. So folks, a lot of people, and I mean it equally to the people on the screen here, which is that you guys should also feel free to ask a question. Also, people who are not on the screen, you can request to be a panelist and come on board, don't be shy. Or you can just raise a hand, ask question. So it is actually pretty open format at this point. But before I kick it off to everyone, having asked a few questions, I know that people on the panel here will also have some views. So if any of you actually wanted to chime in on the questions I've already asked Krishna, please feel free to do that.
I mean, I'll probably go.
Sure.
More than answering the questions already covered, Alok, I'll probably start with a question which I had to Krishna. Krishna, so obviously, I think after you hit a certain scale, one of the key things that we also keep going through is how do you determine, like, say, the price elasticity, right? Like, let's say, you've gotten comfortable with, like, say, a $59 or a $69 pricing point. What are some of the experiments that you've run to see, what's that next sweet spot before you start losing deals to your competitors versus, essentially optimizing for, like, say, market share versus the overall LTV, right? Like, any thoughts there?
Again, I'll say, I mean, first I'll say that we are still in that phase, so don't have that entire experience. But one thing what we have seen is, I mean, obviously you continuously gauge your pricing, and honestly, like we haven't, so there is one thing is, in enterprise you have a fixed price, but then when you start dealing or negotiating, sometimes our deals are 100 people, sometimes our deal sizes are 20,000 people, right? So obviously there is, anyways, you have to be very fairly elastic to figure out that what kind of budgets it will fit in, right? Because also this pricing per user only works for a certain range. Like, it generally works between a range of 100 to probably 1,000 to 2,000 users. After that, you have to become creative, because otherwise it doesn't work out. I mean, like, the pricing seems ridiculous, right? So you have to come out with a model which is, again, gets back to a enterprise model, and then you actually retrofit it like a per user or something like that, right? So in that sense, again, so yeah, a little bit digressing, but yes, coming back to, so what you typically do is you keep going back with that price, and if the customers, your existing customers, are renewing, or if they are happy, that means you are delivering value, right? If nobody is complaining on that particular aspect. So second thing is, you actually constantly see the market and see if you are losing deals on pricing, so then you try to figure out, right? The third thing is, in SaaS, I think all of us know, you have to innovate. So you cannot be like selling the same product sometimes. And I think this is a very interesting thing I learned is, and as true for all of us, that the innovation is happening so fast that now price increase is really difficult. So you'll have to constantly, just to maintain your price, you'll have to innovate at least 50%, and then probably you have to innovate faster to get to a new price range. So I don't know, I mean, like, whether I answered it, but like somewhere there.
I think that's helpful. And, essentially what we also keep going through, like you rightly said about the pricing metric in itself, right? Like, say, per user is not also applicable for everyone. And as we go more enterprise, more often than not, we tend to go against budgets which are already, like, say, predefined, right? So there's already a budget predefined, and then you're sort of trying to fit in there. And just as a quick follow-up to that point, right? Like, one of the key things that we also see is you want to keep your pricing axis really simple, which is probably have one metric or two metrics on which you price it. But as we move more enterprise, you also want to have, like, say, multiple line items to be able to, build up a good BOM or a good pricing construct. So how do you sort of play with that kind of an equation where on one hand, you're trying to keep it really simple, right? Like you say, even on your website, it's very simple pricing. It's an all-in pricing. But on the other hand, you continue to keep building new features over the course of next 12, 24 months. How do you sort of balance out the two equations? What have you seen from your experience?
So one part is, yes, you're absolutely right that you cannot make it too complex. Gone are the days when you can make a very complex kind of a pricing, because otherwise the customers don't. I mean, that gives you a signal that these people are trying to make too much money out of me, right? So you don't want to make it like too complex. The only way to do that is you genuinely try. I mean, you have to really figure out that the customers also understand that why these line items are important and why they are different. Like, for example, sometimes you have a services line item which people understand that because they are taking services beyond the product, they will have to pay, right? Or there are some clear line items which are optional, which are like something, I mean, you don't really make a 15-page line item, but maybe it is 4 or 5. So you really try to say, like, hey, this is the basic platform, but I don't like, this is an additional service or feature that if you want, we are going to charge you X or Y or something like that. And maybe depending on the customer, you bring in 2 or 3 of them. You don't give them all the 15 things. So idea is basically trying to balance it that, I mean, they see only 4 or 5, I mean, what do you call it? MECE, mutually exclusive and completely exhausted, right? So you try to present it in a way that the customer thinks that you are genuinely trying to, you're simple and you're not trying to overcharge them. Complex and deal by deal, at least in enterprise, you have to work on a pricing sheet. So it's not simple.
Yeah, so just to chime in here to what add to what Krishna is saying, right? So typically what I have seen as a VC, two most common additional items are either reporting, where you charge extra, or integration. So reporting analytics is something you charge on top of core platform, and then you charge for integrations for everything else, right? So that's where it allows you to have some more elasticity fundamentally. But so we are investors in ChargeBee, and they put out a lot of content on pricing and SaaS. There, for example, they also compete with a large number of players. And what we have seen is what Krishna alluded earlier, that you 50% of the time you just have to keep on innovating just to stay at the same price and not lose deals. And then you have to innovate and add new mega features to continue to go up market or increase your pricing, right? So it's very, very similar thought process.
If I may actually take a question from the audience, because there are two questions which have been posted here, and any of you should just feel free to take up that question and answer. So the first one is from Saksham. It says that being an early founder, does your pricing per user change as you gain traction? And if yes, are companies accommodating to the new pricing being proposed? So anyone who wants to take on that question, please feel free to.
Love someone to answer, otherwise I'll hog all the limelights, which I don't want to. But I'll quickly answer that part. But no, absolutely true on that part. Don't worry on that. So because see, some of the price, some of the things, this is the price that you pay to that customer. Like some of the large companies are actually signing up with you, and they should get the advantage. They will get a cheaper deal with you. But yes, as you are doing newer deals, or when you are renewing, people understand because you have matured and your product has grown. So I think the answer is simple is yes, don't worry. I mean, if you're delivering value, companies understand. And some of the companies you have given them free, I mean, they have also taken the risk to work with you. So that's not a problem.
Also, just to add to Krishna's answer, Saksham here. See, early on, I mean, while I would say Krishna was lucky that he found a sweet spot in pricing as he moved on to the SaaS model, very often you don't know what your software is worth to people. So I'll give you this example from Wordfix, where they went to market initially at $1,200 ACV per customer. We didn't know whether it's worth this much or not. And I remember in one of the board meetings, we said, what if we just change our baseline price to $2,400? And we were very scared because we thought we were going to lose a lot of customers. We did it, and guess what? Revenue per customer just doubled with no loss. At one point, then we said, okay, maybe it should be $4,800. Again, guess what? It just went up. We changed $4,800 to $9,600 at one point. That $9,600 became $20,000 at one point. So actually, sometimes I find that this pricing discovery part of it is because your software is becoming better and better over a period of time too. So it is delivering larger value, and sometimes you also go a bit upmarket in selling what you're selling. But I think it's okay to make those experiments, even if sometimes there is a short-term disruption, because if you don't do those experiments early in a life cycle, there is a danger that you're going to leave a lot of money on the table as well.
True, very true.
Yeah, just probably one quick note from an Asian standpoint. I mean, we sell to a lot of Asian customers at MoEngage. So just one nuance we've also seen is that, we have customers who are like 4 years old, 5 years old as well. And probably we would have sold to them at like, say, $100 5 years back. And the product that was sold at that point and the product we are actually giving now as part of the same plan, it's almost like two different companies altogether, right? And the value being delivered is also so drastically different that it doesn't make sense to keep it the same. So every year when we're going for renewals, we try and see is there value in trying to renegotiate the deal value, and at times, especially if you're going for early renewals, we try and see if there is a chance for increase in value, because especially in Asia, what we've seen is if let's say I'm at $100 and I want to get to $120, if I start at $150, I may not get $120, but I'll at least get $110, which is still like $10 higher than what I previously had, which is a good win-win for me. And that worked for us. And I think we continuously kept moving up the pricing benchmark, like Alok was mentioning as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, like I feel what Yash is mentioning is about you're trying to figure out between short-term and long-term, like how you trying to do that trade-off. And in short term, sometimes to prove value, there might be opportunity to, get in through the door get them to see the value after 1 or 2 years and renewal time. Plus your product team would have come up with some new features, some exciting things, especially for enterprise sales, security, all of this. You can bundle it up. And I feel like users are pretty open. US more so. I think in Asia is a tougher market. But then again, I mean, that's how we all are. So that's what we've seen work really well.
Arpit, I think somebody has raised a hand. If you can bring them in, I don't know if you can.
Alok, if you could just make me the host, and then I'll be able to do that.
Okay.
That's it.
The good thing is I don't know how to make you host. So, okay, I'll figure it out in the meantime. In the meantime, I'm going to take another question from the Q&A panel here then. It's a very interesting question actually. From Sachin saying, should pricing be made open and public on website, or should it be custom only? Or does it depend on the stage of the startup? I'm sure everybody has gone through this question. Unless you are selling at $10 a pop, this question has come into your mind. So would love for somebody to take this on.
I think I can go first. $1 million question. I think the answer will be, I think initial, okay, so two parts. One is, at least I think if you are an initial stage startup, anyways, you will not get enterprises. So do not need to worry. So especially SMB and mid-market, I think initial stages or now, again, we never did that. But in retrospect, I feel that you should actually make prices in public, right? Make some 3 plans that up 0 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 200, and then beyond, like very standard page, then call us or something like that. Because I think the good idea is when you are not known, or if you're not aware how to do business, many people actually don't do that discovery. Like imagine you are doing a window shopping and you sometimes won't even enter a shop because you might think that this particular piece is very expensive. But what if you knew that it is in their range, you will at least connect. So my recommendation will be that at least in the initial stages, and generally most of the people start in an SMB or mid-market, you should have some pricing guidance, which you can obviously update. The only problem is, like, don't be too wacky, because sometimes, these things, if, these websites, or these are like historically there, like these are records. So you don't want to be like completely off that you are selling the same piece at $10 and now you have gone to $120. So it becomes a little bit difficult to explain. But I think initial stages, you should do it. And as you move enterprises, you can remove that. But that's my thought.
Sorry, I wanted to chime in here. Sorry, Shri Krishna, I wanted to say something.
No, you at the point.
See, this really hurts my heart, right? So I had a company, or I have a company, which when they were selling their product, they were able to grow 10% month on month for a long time. And I kept telling them, let's increase the price. And they were like, we are unaware. And it was a close pricing by all their competitors as well. So they were in a market where the pricing is opaque. And so we did not know what the competitors' pricing was. But they were able to grow, and we were happy, right? I was happy, they were happy, 10% month on month growth is happening. Then we said, let's do one thing. Let's go and interview a couple of people from our competitors in the US market. So we were selling a product at $5,000 a year. All competitors, the most common lowest price we found was $50,000 a year.
Wow. Okay.
So that's why we figured out our win rate was so high, because our pricing was so low.
Yeah.
So now, at least what I try to do before I invest in any startup company, is SaaS startup, is try to go and do a pricing benchmarking across all the competitors. And especially it's a closed pricing market, closed sector, then there are pricing experts, or you can just go and bombard a bunch of people on LinkedIn who are ex-employees, sales employees, and ask them, okay, I want 15-20 minutes of your time. I want to understand some pricing, right? And you are able to get some intel out of it. So for opaque pricing markets, I would recommend all Indian startups to actually first do this study before you price yourself and you think, I'm able to sell my my SEO and SEM spends are working out fine. Please do that. I think it's very important. For open markets, I think it is what Krishna and others said, right? So it's very simple, straightforward. You know what competitors are pricing at, and as an Indian startup, I would say you have to show value at cheaper price unless you really have a lot of good features. So, then you can price accordingly. But knowing where the competition is very important.
Very true. Very true.
No.
Anand, I think you had raised your hand and we have brought you on here on the screen.
Yes.
Please go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. So my question to Krishna is, so much like Alok was saying about Whatfix, up to our seed round, our pricing was extremely simple. One single lever built by founders who, it was capped out at our capacity or appetite to take risk. We lived in the same fear. If I touch it, if I increase it, I lose customers, what will happen? And it took an external perspective. It took our first investors to say, let's try something new. Let's look for non-linearity. Let's look for multiple levers. And so my question, Krishna, is it sounds to me like there needs to be constant innovation as much on the product as it is on pricing. And so how do you set up your org, and at what stage do you set up dedicated pricing teams? Because I've heard stories of, Whatfix having dedicated teams that only focus on pricing, 365 days a year. I don't know if it's true, but it's something I've heard. but my question, Krishna, is how do you set up a practice or an org, and at what stage is it right to set up a dedicated team that focuses on pricing, especially if you handle a lot of enterprise?
So honestly, I think then probably I'm the wrong person, because actually we don't have a pricing team. So for us, because again, I think it depends on volume of customers that you are handling. So for us, our volume is low because we deal in mostly very large enterprises, right? So I think for us, it is always, we keep getting these inputs, our product team, our product marketing team, or through sales inputs, right? You always have an idea that what the competition is benchmarking. And just as I mentioned, I think I still go back to the 3-4 core things, like the whole thing, like what is the ROI you're delivering, right? The benchmark, how much the customer will be comfortable, right? The same soap, if you are buying it for washing hands, you will pay 5 rupees. But the same chemicals for your kid, you will pay 100 rupees. It's just a perception, right? So that is how you price it. So the whole point is the pricing is what isn't in the buyer's mind. So that won't change. So you should not change, right? So that is one thing. Second is, I think we are in a market which is not changing too much. And thankfully, if you also set a benchmark high, and generally if there is a good competition, they will not bring it too low, because everybody wants to play around. So for us, it was good that most of the people are playing in same ballpark. So we are not playing price wars as of now in our category. So we don't change it too much. We don't have a category, but yes, you do keep check on your win rates. And if your win rates are become really low because of cheap competition, then there's something that you're doing. Then that is a point to look at it. But again, I'll rather let others answer, but we don't have a pricing committee. So we just, run it by a quarter and figure out what to do.
Anand, I may just add on to that answer a little bit, because I have built pricing teams in the past also. But I think number one is that you can have pricing teams for two different reasons altogether. The reason one is that you have lots of line items in your product list, and sometimes just the optimization of what's the metric to choose. Sometimes you have slabs. There are all different kinds of gymnastics you can do with pricing. And at some point, when your list of products becomes larger, you will actually need a dedicated team that is just thinking pricing. And then they also do a lot of analytics on the deals that you have done in the past. What could you have done differently? So much like any other data science job and slightly product marketing job, this is a specialist job at some point in time. That's number one. There is a second reason. Actually, I'm thinking of three reasons now. There is a second reason why at least I have built a pricing team in the past, which is purely to do with negotiation itself. When you get into large deals, you will realize that negotiation is a very specific skill. You cannot have 50 salespeople in your team all being just outstanding negotiators. There are people who just do that for a living. And for anybody who's interested, you should just look up this name called Elizabeth Baker on your LinkedIn screen sometime. I worked with her for a decade. When you are into those multi-million dollar deals, I think she would add a few tenths of percentages of points, if not double the deal size, just because of her presence in those deals. That's what negotiation can add, but I don't think most startups usually need that. And there is a third reason, which is a process thing on the pricing. See, as you get into larger size customers, and since you were referring to Whatfix, in Whatfix case, they have 4 Fortune 10 customers. They have 100 plus Fortune 1000 customers. So what tends to happen is that these kinds of customers need customized pricing also. They don't take your rack rate and say, we'll just pay it. They will argue the hell out of you. They'll be purchasing guys also. So in that situation, sometimes in a bid to close the deal, sales guys can sometimes give sort of throwaway pricing also, right? Somebody needs to hit the mark for an accelerator, for example, at the end of a quarter. Now you can just give a pricing. You know that, look, when next year, when it comes to renewal, you're not going to be able to increase the price. So there is a pricing governance function also that you need to build sometimes. And that pricing governance will say that, look, if it is this % discount, then this person can approve, if not this. Ultimately, you will realize in large companies that pricing approval process goes all the way to CEO also. And that's the third, that's more a process issue during sort of deal execution. But for most part, and I'm believing for most people on this call, most of these functions may not be relevant at the stage that they are at. Maybe in case of Tanaya, that might be very true because Mixpanel is a larger company. And I don't know, Tanaya, if you have all these functions internally for pricing or not.
Yeah, I think for us, I've been with like smaller companies before this, like, you know, the 5 to 20 million ARR range, and now with Mixpanel. And what I've seen, I think in previous stage, what happens is, I think what Krishna said initially, it's all about figuring it out based on sales guys, ACV, what you're going to pay, all of that. You reach a certain level. And after that, I feel like having a PM dedicate, and with a product marketing guy, dedicate some time and think through things like, okay, let's talk to the sales team. Let's get some inputs from there. Let's talk to competitors. Like you guys said, I think Priyank said, I think that's super critical. Then there is analyzing data of deals. What have you lost? What have you won at what point? Feature gating. How are you going to differentiate? What are you going to do between your online plans, free plans, enterprise plans? Value to customer. I think that becomes really important after like 4-5 million in ARR. That okay, now let's start pricing on value instead of going from ACV down, right? Like what's the value? Let's think of 10x value, and that's how we're going to kind of try to price. And then lastly, I feel like, yeah, so like it's not about having a full-fledged pricing team at that point, but having a PM dedicate 20-30% and annually doing this exercise on pricing is super valuable for SaaS to not leave money on the table, I feel.
And I stand corrected, like Alok. So the third part of what Alok mentioned, we do have teams, and that team we brought in like, I think almost 2 years back, like when we crossed $10 million mark, that at least will safeguard your, you know, like the pricing, like the people will not go rogue. So that we have teams so that they can manage all the structure. So those processes we have in place.
I want to take one question on the Q&A panel, which I find very interesting, though it may be relevant to a very small subset of people on this call, which is when you work with large enterprises, they often ask for MFN pricing, which can limit pricing flexibility. How do you handle this? I don't know if anybody has gone through this while selling to customers. Anybody has a thought?
I'm not sure if I'm fully familiar with the MFN pricing, but if you're asking about things like signing up to things like, you know, you're giving the lowest possible pricing to that enterprise. We have seen such scenarios, especially when selling to some of the really large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 kind of company. And I mean, so two things that we used to think through were, one, our pricing plans were always opaque. So there is no way one can benchmark my pricing with my even our company pricing as of today versus last year. Even if they turn out to be, someone gets to know the pricing, we can always defend based on the product features available at that point in time. And secondly, the plan inclusions, and there's 10 other metrics that we can always defend on. You know, we've typically seen that as a clause in MSAs, but nobody actually goes out and does like a real check, at least from our limited experience. I think we've seen in about 15-20 deals so far. You know, we went ahead and, you know, signed up in some of the scenarios, but we've not seen people actually doing that checks as such. But, you know, it goes through an RFP process anyway. So there's a price discovery happening during that RFP process with these enterprises typically.
One interesting piece I'll add. Again, I don't know how true or untrue is, and maybe Alok, you have done a lot of enterprise sales business, so you might share. So one weird scenario happened with us. So we actually gave a reasonable pricing, and we kept the, you know, like rack pricing what it was, right? And when we went to the discussion with the, you know, like somehow the deal went to CIO. Generally, it doesn't get there. And then they obviously said like, oh, any good enterprise company, they will give us 95% discount or 90% discount. And that is the norm. And then we were like in a fix because obviously our like standard price was not like there. Like if you knew it was, they're going to discount it, we would have made it like $5,000 or whatever it is like, right? And that is where I learned that there are a lot of these large traditional, again, I want like, you know, a lot of people in enterprise buying, when it gets to procurement and all these people, they're buying to software at 90% discounts because of the Oracle or SAP or those kind of days.
Welcome to my previous world, indeed.
No, but if that is true, still true, then I think that is a piece of advice that if you are selling to enterprise and filling an RFP, it's okay to put a ridiculous number of like $1,000 per user and discounting it to 95% and making it $50. But Alok, you should comment because I found that very.
Yeah. So I would say that in general, first of all, I have also done MFN pricing in the past, but I can tell you in every single case, I've regretted it. Every single case I've regretted it. Right? This is a ticking time bomb. It will come back. I mean, there is no denying. Number two, I think when you are in large enterprise segment, particularly, and to Krishna's point, when you get into procurement kind of buyers, I would agree with Yash that actually you don't want transparent pricing. You actually want opaque pricing. You want multiple line items. You want multiple flavors of those line items so that no single BOM is comparable to another BOM in the end. Because they will, now there is one nuance to this where actually I think why this opaqueness is very, very important. Any of you who is ever selling to public sector, remember that when they are negotiating with you, they have to justify that they are doing their job well. They don't want to come up for audit tomorrow that they haven't actually asked you for things. Imagine in India, and I hope you're not selling to any of these guys, but you are selling to NTPC, SAIL, BPCL, HPCL, these kinds of people. They're actually just by sort of, I guess, government regulation, you will have to sign for MFN clauses. And I won't be surprised the same is true even if you're selling to US government. But you better make your pricing so opaque that you know that this cannot be challenged. Create new line items because in their RFP, it will say that I need these things. So create a new line item in your pricing that this is a specially created SKU for you so that it is not even benchmarkable. But of course, you will take that pain only when this is a really large price. I mean, for a $50,000 ACV, you're not going to get into that mess yourself.
I have a question. This is of this thing from a very startup perspective and this thing. One thing I do is I do go through G2 Crowd and Capterra reviews and go and try to make interviews with them and try to do pricing. One of the things which I have realized, or few comments which have come twice, it has come to me is like, I wanted to check on this. Like, if you're going to compare yourself with X and Y product or something, and that's going to be priced at such a level, and for any customer in US to even believe that you have a similar technology or a technology better than that or something, you can't price low. You have to have at least 80% or 100% of that price as well. And if you're going to be lower than that, nobody is going to believe your technology is actually superior, irrespective of what your gross margin is, what your actual costs are, and other this thing. And as a startup, you always start with like, oh, I'm actually scared. If he says no, I'm not going to get this pilot customer. How am I going to actually? But how do you go about such situations? Do you offer credits? How do you offer credits in a different way? Because I've also seen and discussed with quite a few other similar stage companies where they say that we put a pricing, then we offer credits so that we can roll over them and this. So I wanted to take inputs from both Krishna and Priyank and others on this thing.
So I think.
Krishna, you're on mute right now. Sorry.
No, I think really important point that because it is a tricky thing because yes, you are right that pricing benchmark are very important. Like you have to be like whatever, I mean, you have to somehow guess and understand. And as even Priyank was saying that what is the market landscape looks like and you are not too far off it, like too low. And as you are rightly saying that means you are not a good product, or especially if you are coming from India, now the perception is changing, but it might be like, oh, it's a relatively cheap product coming from India. So you'll not like benchmark it, right? Or you go and put it some like really random stuff. So I think at least for us, at least the good part is we know most of, if not our tools, but we know what people are paying for Salesforce, right? So I mentioned earlier also. So thankfully that acts as a top. And then you try to figure out what are the relevant tools which are coming in. But in a sales stack, people are used to pay some decent amount of money. And if you are claiming anything called AI and reporting and personalized services and all that, and then you go and say you will do it $10,000, then I mean they also know that you will not be able to serve them, right? So I think you have to like really figure out that how exactly that works. And sometimes in enterprise deals, people are able to tell you like what are their budgets. And as you are like rightly saying, so I mean once you build that champion, and then if you have to fit in that budget, then you do something like one time special discount 30%, but from next year we'll do that. So basically you try to anchor still on what you had, but try to make it like a favor, or like, oh, you know, reducing the support fee for blah blah blah. But you're absolutely right that if you sell the same product for $5, people will start questioning. Like, I mean, if you are doing AI, ABCD, right? Then how can you give it at $5? How is it possible? So they don't believe you. They are right, like, but yes, you will have to play around that anchoring game and then being flexible around it.
One other thing which I have also learned from a friend at Whatfix only, he was saying like you should start looking at Israeli startups and how they look at pricing and positioning. A lot of these Indian companies, and especially going around, one, we price lower, and then our positioning is also like more interesting, and it looks like, okay, it's cheap because it's also of a lower quality. But on the other hand, Israeli startups go on a much higher level of this thing, and they also project the quality and positioning. So in terms of quality and this thing, at least on the software side, is very similar to this thing. Looking at how the Israeli startups, whether it's like Gong.io or the few other ones like AppsFlyer and others, how they have gone and priced in the markets is even including Tune for one instance. It's like a very something. And I would urge almost every single company to look at their category and competitors in Israel or other markets and how they go about pricing to actually go. And it was actually quite a self-discovery for me as well. So what I was pricing for a year for a pilot was some other company based out of Seattle pricing it for a 3 months pilot. And this thing, and they confidently say, and they are still at Figma images only, and they're still able to go and price it at that level just for a pilot. It gives a great confidence for us to actually move up the whole thing. And the perception difference between Indians and rest of the world is also not so much now, thanks to all the good work done by Freshworks and Mindtickle and others the last decade for us.
But I think I'll definitely pitch in here. Like Shri Krishna, you make a very important point is, I think this will be a collective responsibility for Indian SaaS to not go on price wars too much. Because I think you are absolutely right, because I'm also studying this Israeli ecosystem and they've really figured it out. I think this is, I don't know, let's see what it comes out in like next 4 years. But my hunch is they have really figured it out, and India will have a huge competition from Israel because they have got a very good ecosystem built in US. And like, you know, and they exactly, if you can see some of these companies, I'm seeing a pattern. How exactly, like same pattern, same, you know, like colors, same kind of design, high quality product, high pitch marketing. I mean, it's like a repeat formula that they are using, and they don't negotiate on pricing. Like most of these companies, they are pitched at a high pricing and they hardly negotiate. They don't go like, oh, we are $100 and come down to $10. They actually stay on their mark. So somehow what it is doing is that Israeli product is like a high quality, high, you know, like service, high value product, and it needs to be paid like that. If we go into a war where India becomes a place where we are pitching in like $5, I mean like very cheap products, and it might be same quality, but I think it might not be only company specific. As a country, we'll have to create a brand that exists. But I think that's a very valid point. It's a little bit much larger, but yep. I think it's important.
Actually, I wanted to ask Priyank a question. Priyank, you guys have a fairly large portfolio in SaaS. And you've seen so many journeys too. Are there any examples in your portfolio where you saw that, look, they had a certain basis for pricing? Let's say they went with user-based pricing. And later they changed it to something else. Let's say usage-based pricing or some other metric altogether, which ultimately turned out that they were able to unlock a lot of value. Have you seen those kinds of experiments happen? And if so, anything that comes to your mind which has created a lot of value?
I'll tell you one of the things, I mean, for that particular question of moving from user pricing to usage-based pricing, what our companies have done is it's very difficult to move away from user-based pricing. So they have added components where or solutions which allow them to do usage-based pricing and user-based pricing. I'll give you an example. And actually, that's true for almost 3-4 of our companies. Okay. So if you look at Zenoti, if you look at ChargeBee, if you look at CareStack, all these companies have user-based pricing. So they will charge you, for example, or location-based pricing, which is the core. Okay, for each spa and salon, Zenoti charges you certain amount. For charges you for a core platform, I'm going to charge so much money. For CareStack charges you again on number of people in a dental clinic, how many people are going to use it.
Right.
But and I think and I was very closely involved with CareStack and ChargeBase. What we realized was there is this concept of whale behavior, that can I make $1 million from one client? That the moment you do user pricing gets limited, because you can't go and say per user I'm going to change my price from $5 or $20 per month now to $1,000. That's not going to happen. So the way usage pricing was introduced was by having, okay, what can we do now? So actually all three companies have built embedded finance as part of their pricing now. So all these companies do payment processing. For ChargeBee, anyways, is a payment process, startup. The other two also do payment processing. So they build solutions which allow customers to swipe their cards and existing customers to collect that payments very easily. So, a spa or a salon or a dental clinic is not going to tomorrow become very sophisticated in creating their own payment stack. So they're going to buy it from somebody else. And then our companies go and basically tell them, hey, you're already using our CRM, ERP, everything. We'll just give you the payment process, the best possible payment processor included, bundled in, and we will take a small percentage point out of it. And if you look at MindBody, this is where actually they've gone private, but I think the public information is still available. If you look at some of the quarterly reports, they were a competitor to Zenoti. At one point of time, they used to get 50% of their revenue from SaaS and 50% from embedded SaaS. So it was actually very powerful. And so when you're starting to think about pricing, I think we have to think also about, is my pricing going to be usage based and user based? And usage based is generally much better, right? Because if your net retention issues are going to be higher, automatically you will just keep on, as people increase usage, you will just keep on making more money from the same customer.
So Priyank, sorry, I have a follow-up question. I'm sort of hogging the questions here, which is that when you have a usage-based pricing, let's say you are taking a percentage of payments that's flowing through. For these kinds of pricing models, then, how do you do annual upfront kind of pricing? Because you don't know what that will be. Or then do you have to revert to like a monthly invoicing then? And does it create a different level of complexity than in the collections process?
Yeah, the usage-based pricing is definitely monthly. So, and especially because payments, right? So this is even more particular to payments. The customer is not going to pay you, I project that I will have $1 million revenue, so you can charge me this right now upfront. I have not collected, so I'm not going to pay you. So it generally follows after the collection of the customer has happened.
Understood.
So the way to do that is you do instantaneous collection. So if my software allows processing, I can collect that 2% charge immediately right now. So I know that it's genuine transaction and all of those things. So it is a little bit complicated, yes, but it helps, right? The usage pricing, which is user-based pricing, that you can do upfront, annual contracts. I don't think customers have a problem with that.
So go ahead, Krishna, you had a point, yeah.
I just add one thing to Priyank, but this is first of all fantastic. Like, yes, this is a new model. You should think about it in an embedded SaaS way. But I think one thing that if you are selling to large enterprises, so some of these companies are good because they are giving you a cut of revenue. So it can be open-ended. But many large companies, the problem is they have to put in a budget. You have to put an order form and all those things. So sometimes, so in those kind of scenarios, they will be very uncomfortable. They need a number like, like $450,000, then it is, you cannot go back and charge them 600 because they will not be able to give it. So I think that is where, depending on the companies, you will have to be comfortable. You will have to define a models. The one thing that people can do is they can still have a fixed base and they can give them a ramp or something like that. That if your usage goes into these things, these are the boundaries. So only thing I wanted to add was like in some of these large enterprises, you will have to have a constrained environment in which they will operate, and the budgets cannot be too much here and there. So that is the only thing that, it will be a little bit bounded contracts and not unbounded. So we'll have to.
I think, Krishna, what I've realized is depending on how important your system is to the organization, you have a lot of power. Like when Zenoti I mean, there's and a lot of power comes with great responsibility. So your systems can't go down, all of those things. Right? So if the entire business is running on your software, the first time they want to move out the old system, it'll take a 9-month sales cycle. Everybody will get involved. There'll be security audit, software compliance, sab kuch hota hai, right? But the moment you are in and you are a usage-based, then all these things go for a toss, because you can always go and negotiate with them. It is not profitable for us to continue serving you, and yes, we signed that bounded condition, but at some point of time, hey, they also know it's not feasible. So I think, so it comes down to the kind of product, how sticky the product is, right? And typically, what I like to say is if your product is heart of the business, then you have so much power over the customer that at some point of time, like take example of Snowflake. I think they have 180% net retention ratio, right? Usage-based pricing. So they tell you you can use us for zero cost, but they are showing net retention ratio of 180%. So so I think it comes down to how you design the product and which war you're fighting, essentially.
Yeah. If I may also add, even though I was the one asking the question, there are certain products that are actually used by a large number of users directly. And then there are products which are actually not used by users, so to say. When you think of a database is actually not used by user, it's used by an application on top of it. And by definition, they end up being size of the database actually becomes the very natural metric. So they are more naturally prone to usage based. Whereas in some cases, the value proxy is best determined by the user number of users, and therefore that's how they get priced. We have 2 more minutes. I do want to put one more question before we close, which is, this is anonymous attendee asking, would you recommend outcome-based pricing when entering international markets? I don't know if anybody has tried that or has been asked this question in the past by a customer, but would love to know thoughts if anybody has any.
Again, people have asked us outcome-based pricing sometimes because we claim, ours is all around sales readiness. But again, I think we have never given it, because the biggest problem is how come you define outcome-based pricing, A, and B, there is a lot of dependency on the customer, right?
Yeah.
So then at the end of it, you don't want to be in, then it becomes a lot more trust-based, because the customer is doing the right job and all that. So I don't know. We haven't never done it
So maybe, Krishna, to add to your thing, I have also been asked this question probably 1,000 times. And first of all, it's a no-no. You will, as per US GAAP, you cannot recognize revenue if it's outcome-based, because even if you get the cash, you can't recognize the revenue in your P&L. So that's one big gotcha. Number 2 is, for the same reason Krishna is saying, outcome doesn't depend just on software. It depends on so many other factors. So at least my answer always used to be, sure, I will give you outcome-based pricing, but you have to give me control of a company. I will do it. And of course, sometimes when you're coming from a bigger company, you can afford to be arrogant. I'm not suggesting that you use this line with your customers or prospects, but it is just a completely avoidable thing to do. So folks, we have reached 6 o'clock. We have always promised that we will end on time. So thank you so much. I know a lot of people still had a lot more questions. We could not answer them. I want to thank all the people on the panel here. It was very engaging discussion, and thanks to all the people who attended as well. And we will be ready in 2 weeks for our number 8.
So
all right.
Just one thing. At Axel, we have recommended a pricing book to all our founders.
Interesting.
It's called Monetizing Innovation. It was written by a pricing consultant in US, and it's become very popular over there. Might help other startups as well. So Monetizing Innovation is the name of the book.
Acha, interesting. This is available on Amazon, or how do you get it?
Yes, it is available.
Acha, theek hai. Awesome.
Yeah. All right.
Great. Thank you, everyone.